Is a father present? Well, maybe, maybe not. A warm relationship with the father. They also said grandparents are increasingly significant, and divorce is most correlated with a loss of faith. Friends, relationships. But it's both. Churches make mistakes. So what's interesting is I work in this youth ministry world, but I also work with professors and apologists. My professors and apologists are like, this generation needs truth, give them apologetics, give them a defense. My youth ministry friends tend to be more like they need relationships, they need love, they need community. So I tell my apologists, whoa, they need truth, but this has to be relational. And I tell my youth pastor friends, I'm like, you have to teach them truth. You got to give them a biblical worldview. It's both. You notice when we did the atheist role play, it was the medium of the message, grace, and truth. Ironically, when we look at this generation, what do we find? It's a worldview, it's truth, navigate culture in the context of a relationship, which in a sense, with all the changes with Gen Z, in one sense, there's really nothing new under the sun. We don't have to completely reinvent ministry for this generation. They need to be loved and belong and cared for. And they absolutely, unmistakably need people who will speak truth into their lives. We have about 5 minutes before lunch. I assume lunch is coming. Lunch is late. Perfect, because we can use it. Good planning, Pastor. Yeah, here to serve. Thoughts, questions, clarification, challenges. Again, we're going to come back after lunch and we're going to look specifically at the transgender issue. Sometimes I've found it's helpful to just unpack one issue in depth. And at the end, I'm going to say, here's 10 practical ways you can teach worldview as a parent with students. Questions from this, thoughts, things you see about this generation. Because there are differences and kids process this differently. How can I help you as you think about kids today? Go.
What is the right way to approach that person? You tell them you're a Christian, they, immediately have some sort of knee-jerk reactions to Christians who have shown them hate for whatever their background.
That's a great question. Everybody hear a question? How do we reach out to people that have a bad experience, whatever their background is with Christianity? You know what studies show about Gen Z? Their biggest questions. Number one is the problem of evil, which we call a timeless question. In the book, we say there's timeless questions that people always ask. Does God exist? Why is there evil? But then there's timely questions that relate to the culture and time that we're in. Some of the most timely questions, or timeless is problem of evil, but timely was like the Crusades and the Inquisitions and the sexual scandal in the Catholic Church. Like, what about all the bad things Christians have done? And many of this is tied to the LGBTQ movement. True, and perception don't feel loved by Christians. Now, sometimes love can mean if you don't embrace me wholeheartedly on my terms, you're a hater. Well, I'm not going to compromise what I think is biblically true. So sometimes an unfair understanding of love is imported on somebody that we can't change. Nonetheless, here's what I would do in a conversation with somebody. You're talking and someone goes, you know what, and I discover there's hurt there. I'm just going to stop and say, you know what, Kai, I am so sorry you've been treated that way by Christians. I just grieve because I know what the scriptures teach, and I know how Christians are supposed to act. I know I've fallen short in my life in some ways. I am so sorry Christians have treated you that way. I wish I could fix it. I can't. And I might ask them a question. I might say, do you think that experience shapes your understanding of the gospel? If so, how? Are you open to realizing maybe that bad experience isn't what Jesus came to teach? So I would gently and I would kindly own it and just grieve with that person. I mean, hypocrisy is a huge reason people discount the faith. And I'd probably say, you know what, in all of history, I'm sorry Christians are hypocrites. I actually don't know anybody who has been more against hypocrisy than Jesus. So Christians are fallen. They're messed up. I'm one of them. But are you open to who this person Jesus is? Because I think he's different than your experience might portray. Now, can I solve that in the 30 seconds I answer this? Probably not. In some ways, what breaks that down is a relationship with a Christian who's different, who shows them grace, who listens, who loves them. Sometimes we want to get straight to the gospel and save somebody, but oftentimes God works over a long period of time in somebody's heart. So I would own it. I would apologize. I would try to live differently so they could see something different in my life. And then try to, as I can, unpack in their mind. Maybe they're not making a distinction between my bad experience and between what Christianity actually teaches. So maybe I'd say, do you think somebody should look at 9/11 and reject all of Islam because what if a few Muslims did? Probably not, right? If you're going to reject Islam, let's reject what it actually teaches. Now, that's not a perfect analogy because I do think Islam has encouraged violence. So as I'm thinking about it, maybe I wouldn't go there. But the point would be to just try to help this person unpack that distinction and draw to who Jesus is. I'm not going to get defensive. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to argue this person. Because one of the things I do in conversation, I'm always asking, what's the heart of the issue? What's really going on? And if that's it, it's not really the Bible has contradictions. It's not really evolution has disproved it. It's I've been hurt. And Christians are hypocrites. And I don't want to join that club. How you address that is very differently than someone who just has more of an intellectual problem. So get to the heart of the issue and try to address it as you can. It's a great question. Yeah.
If there's someone in Gen Z that has a Christian worldview and it's very weak, and you're trying to, like I'm thinking specifically of my little sister, we have a relationship, and I don't know how strong her worldview is in Christianity, and trying to help her learn more. What are some good questions to kind of show her that maybe she needs to think about more to understand more? What are some questions that might break a shallow worldview quickly or easily?
So here's how I would approach that. There's a certain family dynamic, being the older sister, that you have to navigate a little bit. Above all else, you want to know, this is my younger sister. I love you. I'm here for you. I care for you no matter what. And you're not a project I'm always trying to fix. Or that'll probably damage the relationship in the long haul for most kids. So I would work really hard on just building that relationship, modeling what it looks like as an older sister. How old is she? Oh, she's 21. Okay, that is a little different than like a 12 or 13-year-old sister. Yeah, that's definitely different. I don't know that it's special questions that you can ask, like this question will just do it. I would just look for natural points of conversation, going out for coffee, and just listening to her story, finding where she's at, understanding what she believes, how she processed growing up in the family. With family, because that's tricky, on my wife's side, there's some non-believers that are there, and I don't want him to think McDowell's come around, he's always going to spin it to the gospel. I just don't. But I look for natural opportunities that aren't forced. And sometimes I've had more success than others. That's what I would probably do with your sister. I would look for opportunities. I probably err on the side of listening a lot more than just going, hey, what about this? Mom and dad said this. You might just say, hey, we grew up going to church. Tell me what you think about this. How do you process it? What do you believe about these issues? And just listen and try to understand. How'd you come to that conclusion? Those kind of conversations, because she's 21 and out of the house and becoming an adult, are very different than like a 13-year-old. That's generally how I would approach it. It's a great question. Yeah.
With both unbelieving family members and students, when you encounter kids, let's say students who are sinning in some way and not really worried about it, not ashamed of it, how do you balance calling them to repentance consistently with not coming across as though all you ever want to do is like put this in their face and say, see, this is bad, stop doing it? Like, how do you balance calling them to repentance but still making them feel like you actually like them?
That is a trick, isn't it? Because sometimes if you call somebody to repentance, they might not like you. Right? I think that's the right navigation we do. Sometimes if we care too much about liking us, we won't speak truth. Sometimes if we don't care about being liked, we'll speak truth too brazenly and damage the relationship. So I'm probably just going to look for a time to have a conversation with this young person. I also know, depending on how old this young person is, the older I get, sometimes even with my son, there's been things I'm like, oh my gosh, why can't you see this? This is like painful and it's killing me as a dad, but I can't be that dad who's just nonstop. I pray about it. I look for opportunities. I try to talk with him. I do stuff to build that relationship that this has nothing to do with. And I just trust God over time that he's going to work in the life of my son. In fact, last night, I won't give any details. I was sitting in a game with my wife, and I'm like, just see how far our son has come in a year. Like, let me just give us some perspective. As frustrated we get at some things, remember A and where he's at in B? Let's celebrate this moment, okay? So you got to have a little bit of a long-term perspective. And sometimes I think lovingly in conversation, go, you know what? I don't know what that sin is. Just go, you know, I'm curious. You come to church, you want to believe this. I do see this part of your life. I love you no matter what. How do you make sense of this? How does this fit in? Because and you just ask them and you listen. That's what you typically do. And you trust that truth is being spoken from a stage, being spoken in a small group, that hopefully there's parents speaking into their life. Now, depending on what the sin is, there is a time where sometimes you take a kid and you go, you know what? I love you, that's not going to change. But think about what you're doing. I just want you to know, here's what's coming down the road. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt other people. I just need you to realize this because I care about you too much not to speak this into your life. There is a time and place to do that as well. I don't know enough about the situation to navigate it, but you better believe there's a time to do that with certain kids at a certain time. Sometimes it's just wisdom talking to people who know them, and for me, it's usually my wife. I'm like, here's what I'm thinking, and usually I'm wrong, and she has better intuition. I'm like, good, I'll go with that. Yes, and then I'll come to you.
What would you say, in your opinion, are like the top 3, I guess, quick hits, like books, podcasts, and movies that you think would be good to read, listen to, watch in the next 6 months for us to be like better?
Is this like a softball for me? Like books, podcasts, and movies to watch in the next 6 months to develop your worldview?
I think I'm most interested in the movies, just because I don't feel like most people recommend that, but I know you probably have very similar.
So I love movies, and I teach a whole unit with students based on movies. We watch movies and we dissect the worldview of it. So here's one you could do. There's difference between what I recommend you to do and conversation to have with your students. Watch Infinity War, and I wrote 2 blogs on it. One, the worldview behind Infinity War, and another one, the gospel in Infinity War. Just watch that movie with them and ask them, hey, what's the central ethical question in this movie? You know what it is? To what is the value of a human life, and what would you sacrifice for? That's the question in Infinity War. Remember, it opens up, Loki's like, do I sacrifice Thor at the hands of Thanos to prevent him from getting the stone? The Scarlet Witch sacrificed Vision to prevent him from getting the stone. Does Star-Lord sacrifice Gamora to prevent Thanos from getting the stone? Does, it's funny saying these names, they all get, Doctor Strange sacrifice Iron Man to Thanos to keep him from getting the Time Stone? That question is consistently through the movie. Now, what does Captain America say? When they want to lay down the life of Vision, he says, we're not in the business of exchanging lives until what? Until the only way to save everybody, the only one of 14 million ways, is for the hero to willingly lay down his life to save others. Thanos is the bad guy because he protected his own life and took other lives. Sorry to ruin it for you. You've had time. Iron Man is the ultimate hero because he lays down his life. Does that sound familiar? It's the gospel. It's the gospel. It is literally the gospel in that movie. So I watch with students, and I help, instead of just telling them this, I ask them questions, I unseat it, so they go, oh, now I see. So 10 years in the making, most epic film, arguably of all time, or at least up there in terms of money and stars and 10 years building to it, What's a hero? Well, Jesus said in John 15 that he said, my mind just went blank, he who lays down his life for another. I need some serious lunch. Like you said, greater love hath no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. You see it in Avatar. You see it at the end of Big Hero 6. You see it in the end of almost every movie. You see it in the recent Star Wars movie. Redemption comes at the hand, I won't give it away because it's still fresh, of a key hero laying down his or her life to save another. That's the gospel. So what students need to see is this just isn't coming from the Bible, although it is. Your heart resonates with this and hears biblical truth in the world in which you're operating. I teach a whole unit on this. You ever seen I Am Legend with Will Smith? That's the gospel. You see it, right? What happened? There's a virus that invades the world. One person is immune to this virus. He comes in, and what does he do? He lays down his life and spills his own blood to save the people who have been infected with the virus. That's the gospel, friends. It's one of the most powerful ways to teach worldview. So it's not movies, so much movies you should watch, but when you interact with this generation, how do I use movies and pull out truths that are there? Because here's the reality. Our generation, they're all pro-life. They just don't realize it. They all yearn for the gospel. They don't realize it. They believe there's right and wrong. They don't realize it. It's like a beach ball. You push a beach ball and it pops up. I want to find ways with this generation to say, oh, no, look, our culture's suppressing this truth. You actually are pro-life and you know it. Here's why. You actually yearn for the gospel. Here's why. That's when it takes root in a generation. So watch a movie with students and just ask them questions. I wrote 2 blogs on it. We actually did a podcast on that and explain it. That's a great conversation, and they love it because they're using movies. That's what I would suggest. Now, in terms of podcasts, if you want one that will change your life, you can tell I'm sarcastic. I actually think sarcasm is the 6th love language, although my wife disagrees. I co-host a podcast called the Think Biblically Podcast, and I was going to talk about this at the end. It's once a week, 25, 30 minutes. Typical commute. Double speed, you can do it in like 12 minutes. But we actually walk through issues in culture and integrate it with a biblical worldview. And there's some really powerful ones that are on there. As far as books, Evidence Demands Verdict, if you care about this worldview stuff, so the next generation will know, I think you'd find very helpful in terms of doing this. Other than that, you can come study with me at Biola, and we will really do this in depth. We'd love to have you. Is it lunchtime, or do we have time for one more? Keep stalling. All right, let's do it. At least one more. Yes. Oh, wait, no. I said I was coming to you. We'll try to do it fast. If not, we'll get you later. Go ahead. Yep. 100%. So students with divorced parents, I would say a couple things. One would be building relationships with them and modeling for them what a healthy marriage relationship can look like. My dad came out of a messed up, broken background. And he was drawn to families at the time that loved him and cared for him and modeled this. And I asked him, how'd you become a good dad and husband? You had no example. He said, I just copied everybody else I saw that was good. He goes, I just plagiarized. He goes, I just watched people. So model that. Bring your kids around. Bring your grandkids around. I didn't today, but next weekend I'm going on a trip. I bring my son around. I want people to see me with my son, what that healthy relationship is meant to look like. So as much as you can in your ministry, bring your family with you. Kids are watching. They're watching more than you realize. So have that there for them. Second, I would try to think of ways to help young people see that the way they're processing this faith is through the lens that this divorce does affect them. So do you realize that studies show when kids come from divorced families, there's a high chance they're going to walk away from the faith? Why do you think that's the case? I'm not asking you, I'm saying you ask a young person this question. Have you thought about how your parents, how that relationship, as broken as it is, I'm not putting blame, is going to shape your faith? Now, I understand that. I just want to make sure in your relationship that you don't chuck something because of an experience that fell short, rather than not believing it because it's not true. Sometimes students don't even think about that. So model it for them and just help them to see how that experience, for good or bad, shapes their worldview. Sometimes that perspective can help. The third thing, notice what it said. Studies do not show that the most important thing is that kid comes from a nuclear family. It's a warm relationship with the father. So you pick a nuclear family without a healthy family, a broken family with a warm relationship with a father. Statistically, that warm relationship is more powerful than just two people living in a nuclear family. Now, what's the best chance? Nuclear family with a warm relationship with a father. But I'd do everything I could with this father to come aside and go, look, I'm not making any judgments about this family. That's not my role. But I know your son and daughter need you. What can I do to help you have that relationship? That's ministry. Rodriguez. Okay, cool. I'll just look to you each time. Go.
With knowing that Generation Z is digitally native, what's your perspective on like our engagement on social media, whether it's kind of responding to posts or generating content where we're posting?
Yeah, that is hard. I get like tagged on Instagram by like 14-year-old girls. I'm like, sorry, cannot follow you, and I won't. And they're just thinking, oh, that was cool. We can connect. I'm like, actually, we can't. So I do have a lot of boundaries I build in. So if someone wants to follow me on Instagram or Twitter, like that's fine. I don't block people from following me, but following back, I'm very careful about that. And I think some adults have not been as careful as they could be in the name, hey, it's ministry. We're just loving kids. So that filter needs to be, okay, sadly, what's appropriate, what's right, how can I communicate, how can I not communicate? So I would say as a staff, that's a conversation you need to really have, and I'm sure you're having these conversations. What technology do we use? How do we use it? What does it look like? Kind of work through that together. So I have a YouTube channel I've started. I am on Twitter, use Instagram a little bit, not as effectively. I'm not on Snapchat. And I will sometimes comment, like on Twitter, if it's a public forum and others can look in, like that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I would never message a kid. I would never send on Instagram or Twitter. Probably if a 14-year-old kid sent me a message and I didn't realize it was following him, I'd probably just block it and delete it. I'd feel bad, but I would. So we really have to be careful of those boundaries. But if those boundaries are in place, you better believe we need to use technology redemptively to communicate and reach this generation. I'm going to come back to that at the end, but even when you speak, like use a YouTube video, embed that, use a story of something in technology, because that, like movies, gets a kid's interest, and then you show how to think about it Christianly. The best person who navigates this that I know is Jonathan McKee, and he has a website, The Source for Youth Ministry and The Source for Parents. And he goes through like every single time there's a new song that's out, like he dissects it and gives you like discussion questions. He goes through for both parents and for youth pastors. And a movie comes out, like dissects it, here's discussion questions. So that's a real practical, hands-on ministry. And he has articles all the time. He had one this week on like TikTok. Christian worldview, grounded but very practical. Jonathan McKee, The Source for Parents or The Source for Youth Ministry, is one of the most practical, helpful for navigating those particular waters that I'm aware of. If you search The Source for Parents or The Source for Youth Ministry, Jonathan McKee, MCKEE, you'll find really good practical kinds of things, how to navigate that. Awesome material. Go.
Just even as a parent, what would you say are some things that you guys have done in your family to pass that on? I'm assuming they go to CBCS with you.
They do.
So they're at
Yep.
a Christian school, they're going to
Yeah. So part of the last 10 steps that I'm going to give are going to be directed towards this, but I'll just jump the gun and give you a couple things that I try to do right now. One is just spend a lot of time with my kids. Spend a lot of time with them. So the start of that book, we began it with a story where I was at Starbucks in Mission Viejo, and I was there with my son. He's 7, he's probably 4. And this guy who's maybe a decade and a half older than me leaned over. He says, "Good for you." And I said, "Thanks, good for me what?" He goes, "That you would spend this time in a morning, like a school morning, taking your kid a coffee and a donut, whatever, and then taking them to school." He goes, "I did this a lot with my kids." And he looked at me and goes, "It cost me a lot of money growing up. I sacrificed a ton." And he kind of winked and was like, "I don't regret any of it." Usually you hear stories, people going, "Oh, I wish it differently." That's a story we always hear. This guy's like, "I sacrificed a ton of money. I wouldn't change any of it." That really stuck with me. We sacrifice for what we love. Think about it. Don't answer this question. What do you sacrifice for? Sleep, energy, money. That reveals what you love. So I'm not perfect at this, but I intentionally try to sacrifice for my kids just to spend time with them. And as a speaker and a traveler, that's not always easy. I got to make a living. Like, I've got to navigate these waters. But like in the mornings, I used to like to get up at 6 and work out. My son likes to make oatmeal and have breakfast with him. I'm like, you know what? How long am I going to have a 7-year-old that just wants to have oatmeal and have breakfast with his dad before school? That's more important than working out. I can find another time or not work out. So my framework is, how do I sacrifice for my kids? What does that look like? The relationship is the basis of everything. So there's a lot of mornings I'm up at 6 because my son wants to get socks for basketball. He wants to work out. Sometimes like, I don't want to work out, but I'll go to 24-hour fitness with him. My daughter, I try to do that and sacrifice for them because that consistent relationship builds the time to speak into his life. That's the relational side, is just build relationship. My friend Jonathan McKee actually wrote a book. He said, if I had a parenting do-over, it's really interesting. And it's a short book. I forget the title, but it's like Parenting Do-Over If I Could Go Back, because his kids graduated. He said, you know what? Sometimes we're always trying to teach our kids stuff. He said, if I did it over again, I would focus the vast majority on just loving my kids and living it out. And that was interesting. But with that said, I also intentionally look for opportunities to engage my kids with worldview. So my daughter came to me, not this summer, but last summer, and she wanted these Birkenstock shoes. They're like $100. I guess in Orange County, everybody gets Birkenstocks. To me, I'm like, that's a lot of money for a 12-year-old. She goes, can I have them, Dad? I was like, thinking of a way that she could earn them so she'd value them. So I came up with the idea. I said, okay, if you watch 50 PragerU videos, 50, you know what these things are? They're 4 to 5 minute short, top quality videos by Dennis Prager, a Jewish talk show host. Some are on politics, but some are like Planned Parenthood, ethical issues, historical issues, cultural issues. They're really good. I said, if you watch 50 and you just write one paragraph of each one, I just want you to write a paragraph, and tell me or your mom or your grandparents about each one, I'll buy you those shoes. She did it. She watched 50. Now, my son would never do this, but she did it, and she got the shoes. She's like, I would never do that again. That was a ton of work. I said, fine. You chose it. She learned the value of, like, money requires a little bit of commitment. And she's like, Dad, did you know this about Planned Parenthood? I'm like, no, tell me about it, even though I did, because I want to have a conversation with her. That was an example. My son last year came to me. He's 15 now. When he's 14, wanted to see this movie, Bohemian Rhapsody. And it's about the rock band Queen. And he was 14, he was 13, PG-13. There was a little bit of, I knew they would have an agenda and some sexuality, not explicit. If it was R, I wouldn't take him to it, but it was kind of borderline. Read about it, I'm like, okay. I said, I'll take you and a friend. All I ask is when we're done, I just want to know what you think about the movie, and I just want to talk about it. Like, I want you to watch the movie thoughtfully, enjoy the movie, but there's probably some stuff in there where they're trying to fill your mind with ideas that we do not believe as a family. He goes, sure, Dad. Bring a friend whose mom approved. We go to the movie. We come back and we sit down at our dinner table, like 30 minutes. I said, son, did you enjoy the movie? I said, did you ever feel preached at? He goes, yes, Dad, there was this scene where Freddie, I forget his name, the main singer, Freddie Mercury comes out to his wife, and this must have been in like the 80s. You remember the scene? And she's like, I'm mad. I'm so upset. Not at you because you couldn't help it. You were born this way. I'm just mad at the circumstances. My son is like, that would never happen in the 80s. I was like, you're right. Give me 5. Good for you. Because who's preached at? And I didn't lecture him. I just said, let's talk about this. I said, did you enjoy the movie? And it's a pretty well done movie. It's a captivating film. What was the message? As Christians, what could we take away from this? And we just talked about 30 minutes, and we moved on. So I spent a lot of time building relationships with my kids. But I look for intentional opportunities to just say, hey, here's an opportunity. How badly do you want it? To integrate worldview into it. Now, we do a lot more than that we go through in the book, but those are a couple ways. Is when we wrote the book, I'm like, I'm not going to give parents a new program to do because nobody's going to do it. We're busy. But how do we more effectively use the opportunities that present themselves? If you can have a shift in that thinking, that changes everything. Can I keep going? If so, this lunch better be good, man. Go ahead.
So Mark and I touched on this, but I just wanted to know what your advice would be for students who not only don't have a warm relationship with their father, but their father is a jerk.
Yeah, what advice do I have for kids who don't have a warm relationship with their father and their father is a jerk? I would do a couple things with a kid like that. One is I would just spend a lot of time listening. I'd say, hey, how is this for you? Just want you to know, I just listen. I'm here for you. I'm sorry. I know you didn't ask for this. I care about you, and this is never going to change. So I'm going to spend a lot of time listening and building that relationship. Now, it's important for us as leaders to not try to replace that father figure. There's a difference between being a father-type figure or a mother-type figure and trying to replace that father figure. You will set yourself up for disappointment and failure if you do that, because nobody can directly replace that. So I'm going to build a healthy relationship, care for this kid, listen to this kid. But I'm also, in the right way at some point, going to try to help them understand how deeply the lack of this father in their life shapes the way they think about God. So I have a huge conversation with my students when we do worldview about how our worldview is shaped by our relationships. And I really believe this. When we talked about worldview, I think worldviews are built and developed primarily through relationships. So for my father, his dad was a town drunk. My dad never knew his father sober, essentially until my dad was in his 20s. So when Christians would say things like, hey, you have a heavenly father who loves you, my dad's like, father equals abusive drunk. Why would I want a heavenly father? His relationships were imported into his view of God. So for young people who grow up without a father that's present, they need to be loved. They also need models of people who've grown up with that and come out of it and been healthy. People like my dad. And they also need to realize how deeply those experiences shape the way they understand God. That's how I would approach it and look at it. So my dad, his story, made a movie called Undaunted 4 or 5 years ago, and it won an award the year it came out. And it's kind of not a mockumentary or documentary, I forget what they call it, where they act it out, but then they have him on scene describing things. And he walks through his family background. There was sexual abuse that was there, a father who's an alcoholic, and his story of coming out of it and finding liberation through relationships in Christ. These are the kinds of stories that young people need to see as a model that this can be done. God can still use me. I can get healing from this, and it's possible. They have to see stories like this of God working through somebody's life nonetheless. Yeah. Yes. So here's why. Some people have asked me, why did I co-author that book with J. Warner Wallace, who's a cold case detective? He's a parent. He was a youth pastor, still speaks to students, but that's not his lane. And I said, because he has this idea about reaching this generation that the church needs to embrace. And the idea is we need to move from teaching to training. Stop teaching a generation, start training them. Now, what's the difference? There's a spiritual gift of teaching, and there's a time and place to impart information. But in a sense, that's all that it is. Give kids information. If they don't put it into practice, it's kind of just information. What is training? Well, when you have somebody training for a fight, what happens? In 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, I'm going up publicly, and I don't want to get embarrassed. I want to win, so I'm going to bust my butt, because what's coming up is some experience where I'm going to have to put my faith into practice. He shifted his youth ministry. In the earlier 2000s, everybody was talking about like experience and candles and community. So his whole youth group like left their faith. He's like, I'm going to teach them how to defend their faith. And we're going to take them to Utah, where they're going to go knock on doors and reach out to Mormons. We're going to go to Berkeley, which we're doing in 6 or 8 weeks. And we're going to bring in atheist speakers. And we're going to go talk with students on campus and put the faith into practice. So broadly speaking, it's like teaching the game of basketball, and all you do is sit in a classroom and tell kids, hey, here's the zone defense. Hey, if they do a 1-3-1, here's how you attack it. Here's how you go after full court press. Here's man-to-man. And you never go practice it or doing it. You can never become a good basketball player. Well, that's all we do with the Christian faith and discipleship. Is we're just in the classroom teaching it rather than getting out and having them do it. Now, how that relates to coddling is we're afraid to push kids. We're afraid to challenge them. I think we need to kind of raise the bar appropriately and realize that kids are capable of more than we think. So what happens is we dumb down all of it because we're worried about numbers coming to a youth group, rather than raising the bar of the kids who are world changers and challenging them to go do something great. That's how we approach it in the book, and that's how I try to do this as parents with my kids. We talk about faith, we have worldview conversations, but I also kind of nudge them out to do it a little bit. In my classroom at CVCS, we're taking these trips. We're going to go stretch these kids. Now, out of 200 students, we probably have 20 that are going fine. I can't force those other kids. Maybe they're not there spiritually. But I'm going to take these kids a little bit deeper. And I'm not going to coddle them. And I'm going to train them. So we're actually, because we're going to Berkeley, we have a speaker coming in at Biola Friday 1 to 10 and Saturday 9 to 5. Stephen Myers. If you know Stephen Meyer, one of the leading Christian philosophers. He's doing 2 full days on the called Return to the God Hypothesis, the evidence for God. These 20 kids are coming to my house. We're going to stream it on my thing. 2 full days, they're motivated because that next week they're going to Berkeley. You could never get kids to watch this and learn that material if there wasn't the test that's coming up next week. So the way to shift this is to just say, let's not coddle kids. Now, how you do this, I realize it raises a lot of questions and it's easier said than done. But part of our job, if we want a faith that's last, we got to push kids out. We got to challenge them. We got to make them uncomfortable. We got to rock them a little bit, show them they can have success, and help them get out there and do it. That's when it starts to stick, in my experience.
So let me tell you guys what happened real quick. Cafe Rio had a glitch, lost their order. So our trusty admins have one's on the way back from Costco right now with some pizza, and we already have some salad. So I think what we can do is dismiss, and you can have a break, and you
Cool.
can please get started with some salad. And we're so sorry.
Hey, it wouldn't be a youth event without pizza. So, I'd be disappointed if, it was anything else. So what time realistically, I guess just don't disappear because I don't want to lose this afternoon and just spend 2 hours at lunch, as valuable as that is. So aim to start back up at 1. Is that realistic? At least be here minimally by 1, and we'll try to go from there. Because we have till 3, right? Perfect. All right. Let me bless it. How about that? Actually, Pastor, you bless it. Go. You graduated. Bless it. You're signed. Stand up. Bless the food. Go. You got this. You're up.
God, thank you for Sean McDowell coming here and giving us so much wisdom in how to interact with not just our students, but our family members and coworkers and people who need to hear the gospel and for whom we may be the only witness for that. We pray that you bless the food we're about to eat, that our conversations over it would be pleasing to you, and that when we come back in a few minutes, we will continue to be encouraged. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.